Are you ready to manage your work and personal world better to live a fulfilling, productive life? Then you've come to the right place. ProductivityCast, the weekly show about all things productivity. Here are your hosts, Ray Sidney Smith and Augusto Pinaud, with Francis Wade and Art Gelwicks.
Welcome back to another episode of ProductivityCast, the weekly show about all things personal productivity. I'm Ray Sidney Smith, and I am joined here today by Augusto Pinaud and Francis Wade. How is it going, guys?
Going great.
Pretty good.
Wonderful, wonderful. Today we are going to be talking about overcoming your own productivity system. And while that might sound a little vague, we will explain to you what we are talking about very shortly. And to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass the baton, the microphone, virtually to Francis. Francis, if you want to explain to us a little bit about what it means to overcome your own productivity system in the context of what you have written about in the past, which is this idea that you have the system you deserve. Could you explain that a little bit to folks so that they can understand what that really means in terms of having the system you deserve?
Oh, it sounds terrible. It sounds like there's some blame involved.
And there might be. There's a responsibility issue. It's not blame. It's responsibility.
There is a responsibility issue. Okay, that's much better. Thank you for cleaning that up. But, before the call, Augusto said it well, that everyone has a system. And that system we weren't born with it, obviously. It's something that we developed somewhere in our adolescent to our teens. So we have a way of managing tasks, managing our time, working with our calendar if we have one. Each person has their own sort of idiosyncratic home brew of techniques and tools and apps and devices and whatnot. And it was not developed in a vacuum. It was specifically put together to solve a problem that we had at some point. And what happens over time, I think, is that life changes on us. And, we grow up, we get married, we have kids, we get a job, we get a bigger job, we get projects, we pick up pastimes, we get involved in our communities, we become a deacon at church, all these things happen. And we're using the same put together homebrew of all the things I mentioned that we had when we were 18. And then we have a problem. So we put together this nice solution and we deserved it and it worked for us and we were really happy. And then life changed and now we're experiencing all of these weird symptoms because there's no longer a fit. Is that making sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so I wanted to very just briefly explain to listeners how I define a system, a productivity system specifically. And I think it's important for us all to sort of have at least a working definition of what system means to one's self. And so everyone might find this to be a little bit different, and that's okay. I see systems as being the skills, strategies, and tools that you use and that change over time to match the needs of your productive life. And that is, I think that goes to the heart of what Francis is talking about here when it comes to being overcome by your own productivity system, because it hasn't been looked at in terms of the issues that you're facing in life today, as opposed to the issues that you faced as you developed those skills. It's funny in business. I'm as a management consultant, I typically see people coming into the world saying, "Well, I want to develop our business, and this is the way I want to shape our brand, our business's brand." And frequently, as I deal with primarily small business owners, I have to explain to them, if you've come to me and you've been running the business for a while, you already have a brand. The brand has been developed for you, and now it's a matter of attempting to steer that ship in a new direction. But as anybody knows, steering a ship is not a let's turn right, let's turn left. It's an incremental approach. And so I think, especially when we start talking about systems and changing systems, know that this is not a change overnight kind of thing. So you have to really steer that ship in small increments back toward the direction that you want it to go in. Augusto, I wanted to hear a little bit from you about this concept and your thoughts in terms of you have the system you deserve. Do you agree, disagree?
Oh, I said on the pre-show that I'm going to be offended by that comment, so I may not talk now. But in a more serious note, as much as it sounds when you listen it that way, it sounds like, hey, that's kind of rude. In a way, it's also true, because there's a couple of things that happen. As Francis described, you tend to look for a system for a specific reason. You got a promotion, you got a job, you want to grow in your job, you are simply overwhelmed on the current conditions. So you find a system that starts solving the major points or the major pain points until you get to a certain flow. And when you get to that certain flow, then and reduce the overwhelm and feel like you're starting to move forward and you are efficient and you are and do all those things all those good things start happening, then the first thing most people tend to do is, oh, well, now I can grab more. I for years been laughing about this and wish to tell you that I don't do it, but I'm the first one who do this. And I call this the invisible problem of productivity. The invisible problem of productivity is right now things are not working. So you go and look for a system, you revamp your system, make it work, and then all that overwork start disappearing. And then the next thing we tend to do is, oh, let's add more work because now I have time. Oh, let's get more responsibilities. Oh, let's get more projects. And then you go back to overwhelm and all that. And in a way, that's where you start having that system that you deserve. Because as you get rid of the overwhelmed feelings and you start being more productive and more effective and more efficient, understanding that the three things are different, and you start adding new responsibilities and new projects and new ideas, you don't tend to look at the system and say, okay, fine, I'm going to add this project, but what this project is going to mean to my current productivity system. You just assume, and we all assume, that you have created an invincible thing that will be able to take anything that you throw at it. And what we tend to do is increase, and in many cases, break the system, go back to where we were, with just now we have 20 more projects than what we had before all this started.
I just thinking I could so relate, but it's not in the area of productivity, but in fitness. So, as you get older, I'll say for me, maybe you guys are different, but I'm now 51. Yes, 51 in denial. And something happened. Something happened. Denial is the theme.
Because as we get older, the first comment that came to my mind was, hey, I'm in denial about that. I'm not talking to you.
Hey, the truth, right? So this year, my fitness has dropped. I compared to what I was in my 40s and my 30s. I was doing triathlons. I did an Ironman. I did all kinds of stuff, and I had a 6-day-a-week schedule. It cut back a little bit to 5, but I said, oh, that's because of work. And then this year, I've just seen myself. I go on these group rides, bicycle rides with 20 other guys, and all of a sudden I'm in the back, and I don't know why. And I tried. I'm trying all of my old tricks to get fitter, to get back to the fitness that I had, and to not have it hurt as much the next day. And nothing I'm doing is working. I was on a ride yesterday, and I'm in the back like with a guy who's 20 years older than I am, and the two of us are in the back, and he's faster than I am, and I'm sucking wind, right? And I have no idea. So I'm now at least exiting denial, because I've been in denial for a while. No, as far as I know, I haven't changed. But the truth of it is, if I were to stop denying it, something has changed. And what's changed is that I've gotten older. And everything that guys told me would happen, and I used to look at them and say, I'm so sorry for them. It's now happening to me in that my recovery is taking longer. Everything hurts twice as much. I can't exercise as hard as I used to without paying a huge price. I've cut back to 4 days a week when I used to do 6. So all these things that I used to look at them and pity them are now happening to me. And I'm just, like I said, I'm just exiting denial. And I think most people just, they start to see some symptoms, and then it takes something to push them into reality from that this is not happening. I don't know. It just hit me as a perfect analogy that my health, my fitness is just undergoing this challenge, and I really don't know what to do about it.
Well, the interesting thing about your analogy is I think that it actually works to show how most people think about their productivity systems, which is as this static set of tools and this ever available pool of resources. And just like your age married to your health, it doesn't necessarily mean that as you age, you are going to become less active and fit. There are probably many different complex competing priorities. There are the complexity of priorities that are competing for your attention. Health and doing this type of fitness stuff may or may not be related. I don't know. But what I do know is that for most people, they associate the symptoms of what's happening to their productivity system, that is what's happening to their productive output, as sort of the first sign that there's something wrong with their productivity system. And I actually fundamentally disagree with using that as the metric for changing, updating, and maintaining your productivity system. I go back to this idea that we have various life changes that happen, and whenever those life changes happen, you must look at your productivity system. And so the life changes are, it could be the birth of a child, it could be death of a family member, it could be changing a job, changing homes, any of those substantial life changes, and even some non-substantial life changes, right? Very, very small things like changing the type of car you own, right? Or giving up a car, right? Because you've moved to an urban environment and no longer need a vehicle. I did that many years ago and lived car-free because I was in an urban environment and I had owned a car for the better part of a decade and a half. And I recognized I literally never drive my car. And so at that time, I chose to give up my car. And that really affects your productivity system, right? Because now going to get groceries means that I need to go grab a zip car or, carry groceries many, many blocks from the grocery store to my home. So it ended up creating these downstream effects I would not have anticipated had I not said, okay, this seems like a minor change, but it's actually going to affect me much more than I thought.
Every time I move, I stop taking out the garbage. Do you know why?
Because you don't know what the garbage pickup situation is.
I wish it were that, right?
Giving you the benefit of the doubt.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So my one of the few chores I have, according to my wife, is to take out the garbage. And whenever we move, for about 6 months, I can't take out the garbage. And all it is just that the physical environment has changed. So the habits that I had that used to correspond to the physical environment, like take out the garbage before you go to bed at night. When I move, something changes. And it takes me about 6 months to get back into the habit of taking out the garbage at the appropriate time. Does that make sense? So I used to take out the garbage where I used to live just before going to bed at night. And I had the habit down and I could never forget. But then we moved to a place where you couldn't take out the garbage at night. You had to take it out in the morning. That took 6 months. So just a small change in physical environment can cause certain productivity habits to disappear or go away, or all of a sudden render me incapable, I've noticed.
Oh, I can totally understand that. Minor life events are also inherently stressful, and they contribute to, people's overall health and well-being. How is my system? How am I going to respond to the change? And that could be any number of things, and they could be positive and negative. Some of the most stressful life events are innately positive. Having children getting married, buying a new home. These are not non-stressful things, right? They're very, very stressful. Moving, cross country for a new job, getting a new job, getting a promotion. All of these things can be inherently positive, are inherently positive, are inherently very stressful, and people do them all the time, and that's okay. And just think about the last time you did one of those things and how much stress you went through that. Think about that on the opposite side. If you have a divorce, or if you have someone going to jail in your family for some reason, or a lawsuit is filed against a family member's company or something like that. All of those things become a magnitude higher of stressful. They become so distressing that illness can set in and all those other things. So I think all of those are feeling, you shouldn't have to worry about those things necessarily, but you should know how your system needs to change to deal with changes in your world environment.
As we discussed, larger change, those larger change affect, no question about it, and change things. But sometimes it's not always the big change. Sometimes it's little things. Sometimes it's, hey, you just got a new responsibility at work that it seems, in the bigger scheme of things, it's not going to affect anything, but it changed certain things from the routine. Or, hey, your kid now is going to start doing swimming lessons. Well, it's an hour a week. How much that can affect? Well, we tend to, on big things, when we move, all the big things we're discussing, sometimes people had an easier time understanding, oh, well, I moved. Oh, well, I have a big promotion. Oh, well, I bad things happen. And then it's easier to identify that a change needs to be done on their productivity system. But I think more often than not, the problems come on the little things. Because the little things can, for a really long time, get into your system, and your system may be able to take it and to make it work, not as well as it was working, but still make it work. And then you get used to the system being less effective, but it's still working. And it's not until the system is completely broke that you notice, oh, what happened here? I had a fantastic system, and I don't never know how it got broke, because what you are going to see when you ask the people is, well, what happened? Well, I just add that I now go to the gym twice a week. Yes, that's true. That's the last thing you did, but you did 9 or 10 mini changes in the way that you never took into consideration how that was going to affect your current productivity system.
Yep, it's death by 1,000 paper cuts, right? It's it's that first paper cut that doesn't seem to bother you, and then all of a sudden you're bleeding out. So,
what Ray said, I think, is so important. Though it's that we have this propensity to make ourselves wrong, so we don't hold the 1,000 paper cuts in context, and we don't see that they're just a part of the cut and thrust of life. We turn it into this self-blame game where we see that we must be the problem, and we're procrastinating, and we're not doing the right things, and somehow it turns into this kind of nasty self-blame game. We sometimes convince ourselves that it's because we procrastinate too much, it's because we're not diligent, we're lazy, or some old tapes from when we were kids start to play again. It's not. We don't hold these sort of issues as if they are just a gusto is sort of playing out. They're just a part of life. Small things, big things, they all affect our productivity systems, and they're to be expected. If you're living, it means that you're going to have these things happen in life, and they're going to affect your system. And guess what? You're alive, and this is what it means to be human. And making yourself wrong is the worst. And we productivity types, we guys who put out content, we're sometimes, I'm going to accuse us of sometimes being the worst of the instigators, because we sometimes subtly or overtly tell people, I'll use your analogy, Augusto, that if your donkey isn't taking you as fast as it used to where you need to go, then you need to beat that donkey harder. And sometimes that's just not true. So, I've been visiting some forums recently. In particular, I mentioned it's the GTD forums, and the people come in with questions. And I've been visiting long enough that I can kind of predict the answer. The answer is do more GTD. The answer is, oh, you're not applying it correctly. Oh, you need to do more of this thing that's in the book. Oh, you don't understand. You need to do this thing instead. And I think we all do this kind of game as people who share content, that if it's not working, you need to do, you the listener or the user or the reader, you need to do better following. So we train our followers to follow, and we tell them to follow harder if it's not working. What we should be really doing is teaching them to be almost like better detectives, which is to notice the problem at a deeper level and figure out why first tell the truth that it is there, don't make yourself wrong, and then figure out why it's there in the first place. I think I think overall the energy is shifting away from following anyway to becoming a better sort of discerner of my own problem and how it shows up for me in my unique space. I think the energy is shifting from the one to the other. We're a part of the problem in a way, of not having people shift as fast as they can to becoming better detectives. Kind of like a Sherlock Holmes about yourself. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think there's an analogy here that I use in my own coaching and training, which is to tell people that they become productivity scientists. So I'm going to abjectly deny responsibility to what you're talking about. only because I recently had a meeting with some higher ups who told me that I was uniquely different than everybody else like me in my own world, and I appreciated that. Actually, it was a very nice compliment in the sense that I don't see the world the same way so many of my peers do. And that is one of those ways. I look at people as scientists experimenting, and I like your detective analogy coming from nice. a law enforcement family, and so the reality though is that every person becomes a scientist when they look at their productivity system. You need to understand the elements of the system. What are the components that make up your system? Those skills that you have, whether they be hard skills or soft skills, the tools that you have summoned, to your resources, and the strategies that you use to implement both the skills and the tools. And so, as long as you understand they're not static, these are ever changing depending upon the nature of your world, then you as a scientist can create these experiments, identify things, the variables, right, the skills, strategies, and tools, and then go ahead and test against these hypotheses that you might develop to say, okay, I will be more productive if I invest in this habit. And if it doesn't work out, well, fine. Now you can be a stoic about it. You don't have to emotionally respond as hard or as vehemently to the fact that this thing is not working for you. You can change. And I think that the ability to move with the cheese, so to speak, Dr. Spencer Johnson, you can then change the experiment and move in a different direction. And I think that a lot of people get so stuck in their ways with regard to one specific tool or one specific methodology that they've been using, and life circumstances have changed, and therefore they get stuck in a rut, right? And we all know what it's like to be stuck in that rut. So my thoughts here really center on the idea of being nimble and flexible and adaptive to the range of possibilities, so that you can experiment, so that you can figure out which ones fit your life at this time, at this moment in time. Not forever, because forever will never come. The idea is it needs to work now. and that might be semi-permanent, right? You might use it until it stops working for you. But I would much rather you be proactive, truly proactive here, which is to look at life changes as they're happening and then immediately do use that as an opportunity to assess and whether you're going to then maintain or change the system to suit your future needs.
Yes. You need the system, in order for the system to be effective, and this has been a hard thing for me to learn. Especially at the beginning, I tend to think, oh, well, if I set the system will survive. And my experience has been exactly the opposite. In order for the system to survive, I need to be constantly monitoring his health and his effectiveness level in order to really be effective and to really keep moving at that. Other than that, we got into the problems we have been talking.
So I want us to switch gears into our third segment by talking about the idea of unearthing the cause of the system failure. If we're going to unearth the cause of the system failure and apply new methods into our worlds, how do we do that? If we haven't been operating under my ideal practice, right, which is to say that you're monitoring life changes, minor and major, and maintaining your system by modifying it, adapting as necessary, let's presume that that's not happening, and you do become overwhelmed or overcome by your own productivity system. How do you identify the cause of the system failure, and how do you go ahead and identify and apply new methods?
You said it. I wrote down what you said. I typed it in even. I was like, what? Race brilliance, productivity scientists doing experiments and hypothesis testing. That's really the only way to get at the cause. Because even if you take someone else's reasoning and they tell you, oh, this is the cause, you still have to do the testing for yourself, because we're not all the same. We're all different. You need to find out what the cause is for you. The problem, though, if we have that approach in hand, as you suggested, is where do you practically start in the real world? Do you read 50 blog posts? Or do you read one of these blog posts that says, here are the 100 tips that will make you effective, and you find the one tip? Do you read 10 books? Do you read 500 tweets? Right now we're dealing with, let's call it improvement overload. That we are, as a sort of an internet-driven world, set of professionals, overloaded by the number of possible improvements we can make, and the number of people like us who are suggesting that you make improvements. And it's just a tsunami of suggestions coming from all directions. And what the individual needs to do in order to get to do the right testing is have some kind of working knowledge of their system so that you narrow down the choices. So, for example, if find yourself all of a sudden you're running late. We could have 10 podcasts on all of the possible causes for why someone would start running late, whereas before they never used to. What they need, however, is not to listen to our 10 podcasts. They need a sort of working understanding of how their own system works so that they can diagnose it and get down to the root cause in a half an hour as opposed to 10 podcasts. What I just described, as far as I know, doesn't really exist. We don't have a great system for collating content and for analyzing our own system. If people did, it would be as easy as going into the mechanic and having him listen to your car and figure out what the problem is in 5 minutes. We don't have the equivalent of that level of knowledge. So people end up wasting and spending a lot of time trying to go through a lot of sources to find the little 5% that would make the biggest difference. So I think this is a problem that is it's big and it's growing, and there's not a lot of people talking about what we're talking about, which is finding a solution.
One of the things that comes to mind is I like to do a systems assessment with clients, and what that means is I actually go through the variety of systems they have in place, and this helps us understand the systems that are working and the systems that are not. Because if you really think about, if you want to call it a productivity system, really what that means is a system of systems, because our output is dependent upon a lot of self propagating systems, and then some independent systems. Those are systems that are running outside of you, external. So for one, an example of an internal productivity system is my task management, right? I manage my tasks. I keep them on a list, and I manage those in a very specific way. And there are things, though, that I have automated, so laundry services or dry cleaning and so on and so forth. To a great extent, those are automated or delegated systems that happen outside of my, not necessarily control, because they're within my control, but I'm not managing the details of those things. So between those internal and external systems, they come together to be my, so to speak, productivity system. So I try to think about all of the various systems I have in place, or that is, I try to work with my clients to understand all of the systems they have in place so that they can start to assess system by system what's working and what's not. So for example, if using your example, Francis, that you find that you're consistently being late to meetings. Well, there are two components to that, right? There's an internal component, which is, do you value other people, and do you value other people's time? Do you value your own time? And figuring out that sort of internal, logical, emotional component. And it could also be tools based, right? Your calendar itself, for some reason, is not synchronizing with your phone or mobile device that you carry around with you, and so therefore it's not alerting you as to when you should, be at a particular place, or maybe you're not getting the notifications as to when you're supposed to leave to get to a place, or you're not getting a notification to wind up the work that you are currently doing, so that you can comfortably leave it and then transition to the next thing that you have to do in the day, right? There are those items. So, you're managing your groceries, or you're not. So do you have a grocery shopping list management system? And identifying those system by systems, once you list all those systems out, you probably have 30 or 40 of them in your life that you are actively maintaining. And I think at that point, you're capable of assessing where the weaker links are, right? So like, how do you maintain your car? Right? Do you have a system for maintaining your car? And that might all be tied up in your project or task management system, but it's a subsystem of a kind, because you have to maintain all of those linked parts, right? If you're not maintaining the transmission fluid in your car, then most likely down the road, you're going to have engine problems, and then the car is not going to work just altogether. So you really have to think about the way in which these pieces really tie into one another, and see whether or not you can start to see ties between the many different systems. But usually what I find is that one particular system is the one that causes the problem. One of those subsystems, in computers we'd call them subroutines. One of the subroutines is what's causing the problem for the overall application or the overall system to not be working properly. How about you, Augusto?
And I think that's where, when you get to these points, it is important to stop, and that needs to be, kind of the first step. The first step is not, okay, let me find a solution. And as we, Francis was saying, let's go for the 100 posts or 100 tweets or 100. Is if you get there and you were unable to identify the early signs, or you decide to ignore them, or both, that's fine. But then now, before you go crazy now, okay, let me go and buy 3,000 books, 2 new computers, and new things, and spend $300 in software, is stop and try to analyze and split in as many components as possible that you can see problems, and try to see what are the reasons and what is failing. So instead of trying to fix the whole system and your whole system and productivity, see if there is things that you can tweak on the subcomponents of this, on the small issues where you are having, or the small things that you can identify that you are having problems, and try to fix those instead of saying, okay, now I'm going to revamp the whole thing. That is what I see most people do. Most people say, okay, fine, I was using Evernote and it's failed because I'm overwhelmed. So now I'm going to get a new piece of software, download OmniFocus, and I'm going to move out of here and I'm going to do it from scratch. That's not solving the problem, because what brought you to that point is going to still be present until you slow down and identify. And yes, there are moments that change software and tools is the correct call. But in order to do that, make sure that you have identified what brought you to the point that things are not working anymore, so you are aware of what is happening.
Yeah, I think that's important to take note of, is, you know, how all those pieces are really working or not working together. As we close up, I want to just hear final thoughts from you both. Francis, if you want to get started, and
Sure.
do you have any final thought? Have you any final thoughts for us?
Yeah. Your phrase resonates. Have people become productivity scientists, and I think, to add what Augusto said, become scientists about their productivity systems. So if we could get people to move in that direction, it would address all of the issues I think we've talked about in this podcast. So I think that's the move that we're encouraging, to become a scientist about your productivity system.
Remember, before taking the plane down and unassembly the plane, check if the light bulb that is giving you trouble is working. We tend to take the plane down, unassemble the plane to discover, if we will have changed just this little light bulb, we will have solved the problem. We tend to overcomplicate the solution instead of try to look where is the small element that is breaking the chain.
Yeah, it reminds me of a book. Remember the book, The Fifth Discipline? Which was, it's very old, Peter Sengi's book. He talked about systems thinking.
Yeah.
We're really talking about encouraging and developing people's ability to do systems thinking. And without it, you end up bringing down the plane, delaying my flight, thank you very much, for 5 hours because you think the engine is busted and it's just the light.
Wise words to close out this episode of ProductivityCast, the weekly show about all things personal productivity. I want to thank Augusto Pinaud and Francis Wade for joining me here on this episode. If you have any questions that arise from this episode, please feel free to head over to productivitycast.net/contact and go ahead and leave us a question. You can also audio record a question, and we'll be happy to answer those on an episode upcoming. Please feel free to rate us on iTunes or Stitcher or whatever podcast directory. So thank you so much, and here's to productive life.
That's it for this Productivity Cast, the weekly show about all things productivity, with your hosts, Ray Sidney Smith and Augusto Pinaud, with Francis Wade and Art Gelwicks.